Noshir, thank you very much for joining us. So let me ask you, how are things looking for 2016? It's a broad-based question, but we'll get down to specifics.
Sure. I think for the industry, I think 2016 is a combination of both an exciting set of opportunities and a terrifying set of realities. I think what we are seeing is that, at least for the tech services sector, the shrinkage of our core continues, and it continues at a pace which is actually perhaps even exceeding what we had predicted even last year. And I think equally there is a great sense of optimism and opportunity in the so-called digital space, which we classify as the so-called SMAC stack, which is social, mobile, analytics, cloud, IoT, and cybersecurity. We see these 6 areas actually exploding in terms of growth when you look at it from a tech services side. The other areas, obviously, we see as massive growth areas is analytics and automation.
Right.
Robotic process automation, cognitive automation, etc. We are seeing a massive amount of growth, and in fact, it's represented in the companies that are here at Nasscom in the sort of sense of optimism and hype in terms of what transformation can go on.
So you talked about the shrinking core. Walk us through that.
So essentially what's happening is that when you look at your what we call Horizon 1, either technology or operation spend, the way we do work is dramatically changing. So let me give you a sense of accounts payables, right? Historically, the entire F&A segment in BPO has been built up on people who would actually be able to process invoices correctly, train people to do that accurately, etc. What we are seeing with some of the cognitive engines that are coming out is that the concept of touchless AP is coming, where essentially you don't have to touch an invoice, right? Now that dramatically changes everything you do, because all our teachings from business school has been, okay, how do you consolidate invoices? Don't send too many invoices because there's a processing cost or there's an error rate, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas now with the new engines, you are actually expected to boil the ocean. And not only boil the ocean, they actually tell you what temperature do you want me to boil it at. So it's actually in a whole new world where you're entering, and enterprises are being displaced at an alarming rate.
Okay. So if you were to look now at the opportunities, and the opportunities obviously combine the threats as well. Now, where would you say Indian enterprises stand today, broadly speaking, particularly the larger ones, and how well are they geared to respond to some of these threats?
I think it's a very interesting question, not just for Indian enterprises, but what's happening globally is happening, simultaneously, almost at India. If you started out and you looked at some of the so-called unicorns, you take a Uber or you take an Ola in India, whatever, right? And you think about, okay, so which industry have they disrupted and which are they likely to disrupt? So they've disrupted, obviously, the taxi service mobility markets. They are likely to disrupt the automotive markets, right, dramatically. And there was a statistic somewhere that we read, which is one Uber vehicle on the road in the US replaces 9 self-driven vehicles, right? Now, if you're sitting as an automotive company, that's going to hurt pretty badly. Then you think about, okay, from automotive, you go one step further and you say, okay, so, what about auto insurance? What's happening there? And if you go to China, as I referenced in my previous conversation, some of the advanced attackers there are not coming from the traditional auto insurance companies. They're basically coming from the internet world. And they're saying, how do I make filing an auto claim completely irrelevant? So if you have an accident with this provider in China, you essentially you call a call center, you're directed to take 3 photographs of the car from a certain angle, from a certain way, and you just filed your claim, right? And by the way, the accident van from the auto industry, from that auto insurance player, if you're on any major road in China, will reach the accident site faster than the police. Now just imagine that, right? That kind of experience is disrupting the police, it's disrupting the insurance market for sure, and probably it's going to take away a lot of experience even from the auto companies, because suddenly this site becomes a preferred way to interact, for different forms of mobility, buying cars, everything. In fact, they're the largest, one of the largest car marketplaces in China. So the entire ecosystem is being actually disrupted from people outside of your industry. And you can take steel, automotive, you can go down to insurance, you can look at all our traditional sector. The thing about disruption today is that it's not just your traditional competitors. It's often people with a very different DNA and a very different cost mindset and a very different way of working that is disrupting from outside, and they're achieving rapid scale.
Right. So can business leaders then respond to situations like this? I mean, how do you gear yourself up? How do you train yourself to say, how can I spot something coming from anywhere 360 degrees around or up and down?
So, I don't think there's no one, not us or anyone else has kind of found the magic bullet or the perfect answer. But I'll tell you 2 or 3 things that I'm seeing that companies are doing. First, exactly what you said, which is they're getting their radar up. Right? So it's very important to have instrumentation in this world which actually tells you what's happening from outside of your industry. We are very trained in our corporate world to know what our competitors are doing. We're not trained to think about where Silicon Valley money is going. Right? And for many of our clients we've been talking about lately is you're saying, okay, let's just look at where is the venture capital money, whether it's in Israel, Silicon Valley, Bangalore, where's that going? And it's incredible what's happening there, right? So number one, you actually get your instrumentation up. The second is you create the capability. And most people say, well, digital is about getting people with a bad dress sense and a worse attitude into your office, right? And I think that's a facetious way of thinking about it, which is, you got to start, whether it's your digital cell or a part of a company or a group or an external entity, whatever it is, you've got to get a creative capability to attack the core, right? And you cannot attack the core most of the times from within, right? So you have to have some group in your company that's thinking about, well, if I didn't have these assets, if I didn't have this legacy, and if I didn't have the relationships, how would I actually attack the core?
In some ways, it's also about understanding your consumer better, cliched as it sounds, isn't it?
Well, I think that's one facet of it, which is actually origination and interaction with the customer is being taken away. So for example, if you're a life insurance company, you should be really worried because you or I as a consumer will interact with the life insurance company 7 times in our life, right? And by the way, 2 of those are probably after you die. So you won't even interact, right? It'll be somebody else interacting on your behalf, right? So the reality is that the life insurance company now is at a crossroads because its customer interface will be taken away. And it'll essentially become a products or pipe player, right? So that's one part of the equation which is it's dramatic disruption. The second part is equally, which is they're disrupting work. They're eliminating work. So today, we have a partner from our digital practice in London talking a little later. And what his big articulation is, we're seeing 60, 70, 80% reduction of work. Right? This is not about just automating routine entries, right? This is taking entire buckets of work out of the bank. Right? And so second, if I take the notion of eliminating work, that's a big transformation. Then the third theme is, how do I create a product for a segment of one? Today, I can actually, with precise knowledge, data, I can actually create most virtual products for a segment of one, right? And that's a very, very powerful tool.
Right. So I started by asking you, how do you see 2016 shaping up? So if you were to put all this together, I mean, what we just spoke, is it a debit or a credit?
It's a very, very good question. I can't even tell you for 2016. I can't even tell you that for 2020. There is a reasonable sense that technology spending and capital investment in technology will continue to grow at somewhere around 3 to 4 to 6 perhaps percent, depending on the year. So I think we're definitely going to see greater investments moving into technology, and technology is certainly now 40% of all capital spending in the US. However, who's going to win is a very big question. And historically, we've always taken the notion that our market will essentially grow because every time you create software, somebody has to maintain that software, somebody has to upgrade that software, and somebody has to, sunset that software. With the new ways of developing, that legacy tail is gone. It's going very fast. So you may create the software and you may find that there's actually no need to maintain it at the same level of intensity that you did in the past. So at the same time as where you see all the opportunities that I talked about, you see this great negative, which is to say work is actually being taken away. And work is no longer necessary in the new world. So even if I invest more in capital, I invest more in software, it may not translate to human work, particularly in global shoring.
Which is why I'm investing in the first place.
Exactly, right? And so it is a little bit of a crystal ball today. If you ask me, I think the net is positive. We definitely see that for companies that are making the leap earlier rather than later, it's a massive positive. Because you can hoover up business from many, many competitors if you actually make that leap. We're also seeing that folks who don't have that legacy problem, for example, some of the mid-tiers, they're actually far more aggressive in changing the business model. So all our paradigms on the past where we said scale matters, it does still matter, but if you're smaller, suddenly you don't have the legacy problem. And second is you're more adept to actually changing your business model because you actually see that happening in front of you and your clients are forcing you to do it. But net, if you ask me, I still think it's a positive.
Right, a good note to end on. Thank you so much, Noshir. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Govind.